So first off, we're going to hear from Woodson Walker. Would you welcome Woodson for me?
Thank you, Mosaic, for giving me an opportunity to speak to you on a subject that I'm certain is as important to many of you as it is to me, and that's Black History Month. This morning when I appeared before you, I failed to introduce myself to you, and Alex Diaz told me at the intermission that while hope may have led me to believe that everybody knows me, that's not the case. So I want to tell those of you who do not know me that Hope and I have been members of this church for 11 years, and every minute of it has been growth for us spiritually, intellectually, socially. And my most exciting opportunity at this church, and Fortula has also been a member. She raised her hand. Everybody does know Fortula. But the greatest opportunity I've had at this church since I've been here, other than worshiping and getting to know each of you, is to co-chair the Racial, Ethnic, and Cultural Diversity Circle, which is a circle in the church that is committed to helping people who care deeply how to communicate with people whose cultures and ethnicities and nationalities are unlike their own. And so that's, in a nutshell, who I am. I wish to speak to why Mosaic Church celebrates Black history this morning, and to summarize it with 3 observations. One is that Black History Month was not, I underscore not, founded as a way to elevate African Americans over others. It is not a way to make African Americans more important than Latinos, Asians, Caucasians, Native Americans, or other people. That is what it is not. Black History Month was founded in an effort to correct the failure of historians to accurately record the entirety of the African American experience in America, and not just the negative or manufactured aspects. Thirdly, Black History Month at the most spiritual level is an attempt to heal the rupture that was created between the African, who is now known as the African American, and his white brothers through the negative experiences of slavery and racial separation, which for more than 400 years has been a part of the racial fabric of this country. Black History Month is designed to bring African Americans and other ethnic groups together, not to further divide. As a demonstration of what I'm talking about, I've asked 2 people in the audience today to respond to a couple of questions that I have, and the first is Mary Givens. Mary, I'm going to ask you if you'd stand so people can see you. Where are you? Here she is. Mary, I'm going to ask you if you would turn to page 273. Can you find it? That would surprise me if you can find 273. Mary is suspicious that her eyes are failing her, but the reality is there is no page 273. Nathan Gay, I'm going to ask you. I've also asked Nathan. Nathan, where are you? Here he is. Nathan and Mary both are members of the Racial, Ethnic, and Cultural Diversity Circle. Nathan, would you turn to page 565? He probably suspects by now that he won't be able to find page 565. And you won't, Nathan, because those pages are missing from their books. Those pages are here. That's why we celebrate Black History Month. Because the pages that pertain to African Americans or missing. It's not an attempt to create a reality that doesn't exist. It's an attempt to record a reality that's never been recorded. Black History Month is intended to make sure that those missing pages are inserted so that the world will know the complete history of America. You see, slavery in the early days required both African Americans and Europeans to be enslaved until they could work off their indentured servitude. That is what the case was in 1613. Most of us cannot imagine a time when the country was not racialized, but in 1613 it wasn't. Both blacks and whites were enslaved, but they had the freedom to work off their slavery. It was in 1619 that the corporate interests and the moneyed interests decided that slavery should be restricted to African Americans alone, and went from indentured servitude to chattel slavery. And it was then that the corporate interests and the business interests and those who would divide black men and white men from each other started promoting the idea that if you were black, you would never be allowed to gain your freedom, but if you were white, you would never be required to be a slave. And the division occurred. This is a spiritual story because it's not unlike the story that we find between Jacob and Esau. You all might remember that Rachel, the mother of Jacob and Esau, injected sin into the relationship between these two brothers when she showed favoritism to Jacob over Esau. And it created division between two men who had up to that point loved each other and had been brothers. And we can hear the mother saying after this episode to her son Jacob, she says to him to secure his safety, "Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, arise, flee to Laban, my brother in Haran, and stay with him a while, until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and fetch you from there. Why should I be bereaved of you both in one day?" And so the separation occurred because of the injection of sin. Most of us know the story of the separation, but few of us know of the story of the reunification of Jacob and Esau. That story is alluded to in Genesis 35 and 29, briefly but significantly. It reads, Isaac died, that's the father of Jacob and Esau, and soon afterwards at the ripe old age of 180, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. So you see, Jacob and Esau were reunited, and they were reunited around the death of their common father. And so it is with blacks and whites, Asians, Latinos, and others, that we're being reunited around the death of our common father, Jesus Christ. I invite you to listen to John Kirk now, who is the director of the Joel E. Anderson Institute on Race and Ethnicity, who will give you just a little teaser of one of the thousands and thousands of pages of African American history, that have been left out of the history books. Dr. Kirk.
Thank you, Woodson. I brought a prop with me today, the Arkansas Times this week, which is one of the missing pages that Woodson was talking about of African American history, not just in the nation, but also right here in Arkansas. Flowers was a Pine Bluff attorney who helped with the expansion of the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in the state, in the 1940s and 1950s, that paved the way for Daisy Bates, who of course is a better known civil rights leader here in the state, who in turn was a mentor for the Little Rock Nine, during the desegregation of Central High School in 1957. And part of your homework this week is to get a copy or visit the Arkansas Times website and learn a little bit more about the missing pages from Black history right here in Arkansas. And I choose to bring attention to this for another reason. Now you see images from flowers on the screen. For another reason, that I've been here in Arkansas now for around 7.5 years. And during that time, I've discovered that you're never more than 1 degree of separation away from the person you're sitting next to or standing next to. And Flowers has a link between both myself and Woodson. Later in life, Flowers was part of a pioneering effort in West Little Rock to set up an early multicultural, multi-ethnic church at Hunter United Methodist. And at that time, I know that Woodson, from conversations with him, was one of the congregation there, and Flowers was Woodson's pastor at Hunter. And I also found out between services, because we did this in the earlier service, Woodson told me that Flowers was also the first black attorney he ever met, and was inspirational in Woodson's chosen vocation of becoming an attorney. And some of you may know that the Arkansas Black Law Society today is named the W. Harold Flowers Law Society in his honor. Flowers also played an important role in my life, because 25 years ago now, when I was working on my PhD at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne in the United Kingdom, one of the first pieces, one of the first missing pages that I wrote about Arkansas's African-American history was a chapter on Harold Flowers in a book called The Making of Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. So Flowers was one of the first pieces that I wrote, and since then I've written 8 books and countless articles and essays and newspaper pieces and encyclopedia entries and radio bits and newspaper pieces documenting and cataloging the many missing pages and people from African-American history, black history in Arkansas. And yesterday, when I read Woodson's remarks for today, I thought about how to explain the importance and significance of black history to a congregation of believers. And I thought that's easy, because nobody better understands history and the importance and purpose and significance of history better than believers do. Because, of course, you know, the first 3 words of the Bible tell us what? In the beginning. So the Bible starts at the beginning, and it ends at the end of time, and it covers everything else in between. And all the initial books of the Bible deal with the history of God's creation and the history of God's people. So the historical texts in the Bible are the very foundation upon which the rest of the Bible and the rest of the faith is built. So history is the core of the foundation. And one of the important things that we know as believers about that is that everything throughout the whole Testament points towards the coming of Jesus in the New Testament. So all that past is building up and pointing the way and pointing towards the direction of the coming of Christ in the New Testament. And when Christ arrives in the New Testament, he spends a lot of his time pointing backwards at that history to reveal who he is. He says things like, "It is written," and he quotes scripture from the Old Testament to say, "This is me. I've always been coming. This is the person who I am." And that's an important part of Jesus having authority, of having legitimacy, of being able to demonstrate to others who he is. So history plays an important part in giving Christ his legitimacy and his authority in the days when he walks the earth. But imagine what it would be like in the Bible if Christ was missing from the Old Testament. If he wasn't there at all. And if he just suddenly appeared in the New Testament, people would say, well, who is this person? Where's he from? What's his legitimacy? Where is his authority? Where's it stem from? And if you think about that, then think about how the history of the nations are told. Our nation. history of the United States. And if you embark upon a project to very purposefully and intentionally write out a people from that history, to marginalize, ignore, or erase them altogether, that helps us think about what the purpose of that project is. And the purpose of that project, when nations do that, is to marginalize, ignore, and erase those people from the past so that they can do the same thing in the present. That is, to deny the legitimacy, the place, and the authority of those people in the present day by erasing them from the past. But as believers, we all know that the names of all of God's children are written there in the book of life in heaven. Right? We all know that as believers. We've all read that. And we also know as believers that part of our charge is to make sure that His will is done on earth as it is in heaven. And I figure that if the names of all God's children are written there in the book of life in heaven, then the names of all God's children should equally be written right here in the book of life when we write it on earth. Amen. And so my work on black history in Arkansas and beyond over the last 25 years or so has been dedicated as part of the extension of my own faith life and my own faith journey and the conviction that His will should be done on earth as it is in heaven. And my membership of Mosaic Church is a further extension of that as well, since I know that as a church we are committed to acknowledging and understanding through Black History Month and other activities a more inclusive past in order that we can build a more inclusive present so that all of God's children can walk together into the future, into more inclusive future that we know is coming for us all. Thank you very much.